Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 242 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, which today, it's a What's Going On episode. So we are recording on the 30th of June, 2020, and we have articles about productivity surveillance software, the introduction of a new law in Spain around remote work, how performance reviews are being adapted during the pandemic, and even some new features in Slack, which reflect the new needs of organizations. So I'm Pilar Orti, lovely to have you here with us because, of course, at the other end of Skype is Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hi, Pilar. Hi, everybody.
I always laugh when I say at the other end of Skype because it does catch a lot of people off guard that when we record on Skype. But, it's okay. We have a plugin.
Works for us.
Yes, good. Classic Skype, may I add, not Skype for Business. So, so this is a What's Going On episode. So let's have a listen to the music. So the first article, shall we go straight into it, Maya, as Trello opens and we go, is it going to work? Is it going to work? It's, as I was, we've got quite a mixture of articles. Some are high level, some are detailed. But this one was from HR Dive. And it's called Productivity Monitoring, Considerations for HR from Compliance to Culture. And it's from the 8th of June, 2020. And, it does talk about how more companies now with people working from home have resorted to using employee monitoring solutions. And of course, we can throw our hands up in the air around this, and so will a lot of our listeners. But what are some of the things that caught your eye in either maybe agreement, because there's some very interesting stuff here, or surprise, or I don't know, what are your thoughts, Maya?
Oh, I think my main response to this was, oh no, here we go again. It seems such a shame after so many people have now experienced remote work, obviously with varying levels of success and productivity within that now people are looking ahead to longer term solutions. A lot of them are clearly considering implementing these kind of applications, and probably retrospectively on people who have managed without it for a little while. I don't know, I just really, really would have hoped that we could have moved the debate on past this to how to measure what actually matters within remote work. A bit depressing, really.
If they've got some points that I hadn't thought of, though. So, for example, I'll quote, this includes, so they're talking about how some of these systems work. This includes ensuring employees are being productive and are maintaining the same level of in-office security while out of the office. Mm. A recent study found that around 30% of employee accounts globally were compromised since employees started working at home due to COVID-19. This is something that, yes, I mean, I wouldn't be monitoring employees for that. And I wish that we could separate productivity from security. I think they're two very different things.
Completely. This is conflating two completely different issues. And they're coming from different places within the enterprise as well. Surely the information security thing, obviously there's huge challenges with people using their own devices and so on. But that's one area. I think it really is important to keep that separate from monitoring performance, which is a different thing altogether. And I'm not sure that the two really sit next to each other in the same app. I'm not quite sure how.
And something else that I hadn't thought of, and it worries me in a different way, and I'll quote again, Monitoring might uncover harassment or information about an employee's health that impacts the job. Once the employer gains that information, they may have a legal obligation to act. So
it reminds you how intrusive these things are, and how sort of what a blunt instrument it is, that it can really pick up all sorts of things, this sort of law of unintended consequences. So maybe it's a salutary warning of what a minefield it is when you start trying to monitor people at this level.
Yeah, and also I think if we've never worked in this way, falling back on the monitoring that the tech can bring up, I don't know. I think it in a way it could be very easy. Is what I think is what I'm trying to say. It's really hard to monitor to monitor in the broader sense of the word, to monitor how our employees doing, to make sure, especially in turbulent times, that they're not that they're not getting into trouble mentally with their context, whatever. And it would be very easy to fall on technology to tell us what's going on. And I think this is very complicated because you have to interpret data in order to understand that. So this one, I think also they glossed over it, which I just wish that they'd gone a little bit into more detail with that specific one.
Yeah, and it feels like all of these things they have the potential to do things they weren't meant to. They have the potential not to do the things that you wanted them to. And a lot of them could create perverse incentives and people behaving in particular ways because of this surveillance, which would impact on their productivity anyway. Like things like these systems that take screen grabs at intervals and so on. Well, all that would mean is that if you know that, you check Facebook on your phone, whereas you might be getting more done if you had it in another tab on your work computer instead of going to another device, for example. They will make people behave in certain ways that take account of the monitoring, and that might not be the most constructive or the most aligned with what you want them to be doing anyway.
Yeah, and then finally, my favorite bit was Rhiannon Staples, who is a chief marketing officer of HiBob, an HRIS platform. She said, aside from compliance issues, monitoring remote employees' productivity is a bad idea. Employers are falsely relying on monitoring technology to be the manager's eyes and ears. And she said, and I think this is a brilliant quote, "Surveillance is not a replacement for leadership."
Yes, here. That's the whole point, really, isn't it? These are tools. They're not a substitute for actually managing the work and the people doing it. They're sort of analogues, or maybe things that can provide false reassurance that you're doing that. And it is admittedly harder to manage people at a distance, but there are companies that can help you with that. Hint, hint.
And I think also the argument always with productivity apps is that it can help the worker as well as the organization or the management, whoever is installing it. And I think there are arguments for that, as in it could well be. It's all about how we're setting it up, but the fact that we're calling it surveillance already,
it's not a good start.
So to counteract our arguments, though, there's an article from the HBR Ascend website, which is titled "We Work Harder When We Know Someone's Watching." And this is also from the 2nd of June, 2020. And when I say also, I mean June. And of course, this is not new. We know the Hawthorne effect, when people are working harder when they know they're being watched. But I just think it's interesting that they've done some new research around this. And I thought, well, maybe sometimes even if the surveillance, even if the app is not working, we might want to put some productivity tracking app on our computers just to remind us. I don't know. What do you think of that?
I think it's really interesting because you can't disagree with any of the psychology referenced here. But the difference in this article compared to the last one is that we're talking about things people instigate for themselves often in order to try and make themselves more accountable, finding productivity buddies or leaving a video meeting open and so on. Should people be left to do that for themselves? Should the management structure behind them in an organization be kind of providing that for them? I really wonder what difference that makes to the motivation. And this article doesn't use the word surveillance at all.
Yes.
It's completely different. It's talking about your own motivation and drive for getting things done, which is a completely sort of 180 degrees on that. And I think this is a really helpful read for anyone maybe struggling with that motivation when they're working on their own. And it's definitely true that we do perform better when we know people are watching. So that kind of supports the surveillance argument as well. And I don't know, there's got to be something very open and consensual about it, I think. And maybe what it means is that organizations need to have conversations about this. How can we, as an organization, support you to be productive and accountable and stay on track and feel that you're visible to us, that we're measuring what you're doing and your efforts appropriately, and maybe have a conversation about that within the team.
Yeah, definitely at a team level, this is so important, in addition to whatever the organization decides to go with. There's always, especially in larger organizations, we've got to bring this back to the team level because it's so, like you say, it's so personal also. Yeah, you're right. There's a whole list of examples of of things that we can do when we're working away from others if we do feel that being visible to others and being connected literally in some way to others helps. I'm quite and the article says that, and we've talked a lot about visible teamwork, which is just these routines of posting regularly the progress of our work so that our team members know where we're at with our tasks, which sometimes is more important than others. That can be a way of feeling like you are accountable to someone else, and if that helps you, then these systems should be, you should stay on top of them.
It's so dependent on whether you think it's helping you or not, and I guess that is really connects it to how dependent it is whether you want it or not in the first place. Some of these things, the last one on the list is at the end of each day, write a done list and share it with colleagues, friends, or family members. You see, I don't write a done list, I write a to-do list and then I cross it off. But that list at the end of the day is really important to me. I can see what I've done, all those things crossed off, hopefully, if it's been a productive day. But I don't need to share it with anyone. But as a freelancer, I don't have a manager, but that my motivation comes from that list of stuff being done. And maybe, other people would have different ways. I like the idea of take pictures of your work and share them with colleagues, supervisors, or even your friends. Well, it depends. I suppose it just shows it depends so much on the work you're doing. Nobody wants to see pictures of this is what a document looks like. Here it is, I wrote this.
But there's a point. It doesn't matter if people don't want to see it. It's about you saying, hey, I did it. Here it is. Here it is. Yeah, but it goes back to your point about conversations, though, and even at the team level, when we are designing how we're going to stay in touch, how we're going to stay connected, and how much information, not just do we need from other people, but how much information we feel like we need to be giving for some reason, and then designing around that. It is very complicated, but a conversation can make it simpler. Just to, okay, this helps me, this doesn't help me. All right, how do we design together?
Yes, and a lot of these suggestions here are very helpful for freelancers or solopreneurs as well to think about establishing these mechanisms. Even if you haven't got a team, go find one. Find a tribe of people that you're going to stay accountable to, will share your updates with, and so on. It's often a lot of people who find themselves working on their own, perhaps unexpectedly, might find it really helpful to find others in the same boat and connect with them.
Mm-hmm. Good. So, this is kind of things that are emerging and conversations that are being amplified really because of the current situation. But of course, we had a conversation with someone from Time Doctor, which is, I don't even know if they're still around, a productivity software, a couple of years ago about this whole thing. So all of this has been around. It's just now it's being, of course, amplified. And about to be some new stuff that is about to come out, which is I'm finding it fascinating seeing what is going on in Spain, because it's bringing up stuff that actually, it's not just Spain specific. It's happening. There are conversations happening everywhere, but at the moment, the Spain is actually going to legislate around remote work or telework, like they still call it there. Although I'm fighting very hard to change the horrible word, especially because television is tele. So I always thought, well, teletrabajo sounds like we are working while we watch TV.
Yes, which is what we don't want people to think is what you do.
No wonder there's been such resistance from companies. Yeah. So there's been a consultation, and of course our colleagues who are in Spain have been sharing their recommendations on LinkedIn and everything. So it's been quite interesting. There's I think I shared it I don't even think I've shared this with you, Maya, which is an article from El Pais. It's not the Future for Work one. No, sorry, because I just caught it this morning, I think. So before we go into this article that Future for Work have seen, as in what's currently come out of the current working from home forced situation, I just wanted to pick up some of the arguments that are coming up now around the new law of telework, which is actually saying things like, okay, if you have someone working remotely for you, you must pay the electricity, you must pay these costs. And then, of course, well, what proportion of costs? And this is another conversation that's been around in the remote work world for ages, which is how much do you need to legislate?
Yes.
Because as soon as you legislate, you remove flexibility.
And a lot of it's expensive if it requires putting in new lines and things like that. Often there are parts of Spain where those expenses could be fairly impressive, maybe more so than lots of urban UK.
Yeah. So there's just a couple of things I want to pick up from this article in El Pais, which the one we're going to gloss over, someone saying, well, we can't have everything can be remote work because we need to create a company culture and a team culture. And of course, they haven't heard of visible teamwork yet. And then the unions. This is what's very interesting. The unions are speaking very loudly about this. One if they're saying, well, you can't have more than 4 days of remote work a week. So that's one thing. Okay, they say that. So these are all the kind of situations that are really interesting because I don't know where they're coming from. But the worrying one, and I think it's very strong, very well, I think justified worry, is that they're worried about this being a take it or leave it situation when you say to a potential employee or a current employee, you either work from home or you have to find another job. And this is where I think a lot of the objection about this is coming from is, okay, if we say 4 days at home, 1 day in the office, then you can't have that. It can't be just a cost-cutting thing. You can't be, you're not going to discriminate against the people who want to take it and those who don't. It's really, this is going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it really will. And to see, because the uptake of remote work in Spain was so low before the crisis, it's a very different sample to places like the UK and the US, where it was already very much an accelerating trend. And there's a sense of a sort of a different social response to it. For some people, it's such a huge shift from anything that they probably didn't know anyone who did it, who worked in that way before, certainly on an employed basis. So it is really interesting to see how people are responding, how society is going to be responding. And I think they're right that there are going to be a lot of take it or leave it situations, because if employers can't guarantee safety in the office, or they say we can only do it with a certain density of people coming in, then they are going to say that. And it's going to be very difficult for business as well, with the way the economy is suffering at the moment. And it's very difficult for businesses to unemploy anyone in Spain. It's very expensive and difficult. So I don't know. I really hope this isn't going to be used as a kind of way around constructive dismissal to let people go who they know really don't want to work from home or aren't suited to working from home. But it's the only way that they can not have them back in the office.
So I think that even though that conversation might be slightly removed or distant to some of our listeners, I think it's what's interesting for me is that it's bringing back some questions that we might have forgotten about, because this could well happen somewhere like the UK. Like you say, the economic situation, well, it's also going to be bad. And just because it's been more established doesn't mean that now that we're having more of these conversations that it can't happen. So I think it's worth keeping an eye out to remind us of the arguments for, against, the compromises when we introduce it.
And ways to take your team with you and make a decision together rather than this being a director level or a manager level thing, that this is what we're going to do from now on. It can be handled much more consultatively than that.
Yeah. So very interestingly, Future for Work Institute, who are, I don't know how to describe them. They're a kind of think tank and also consultancy. They're at the forefront of communicating the new trends in the world of work. They work mainly with HR. They did a survey. They carried out a survey in the last week of April and first week of May, and they asked people how they viewed how their management at all levels was dealing with the pandemic. And this, of course, includes the working from home, etc. And I picked up a couple of things. Do you want me to run through them, Maya? And then
please do. I have translated the article because I first admit my Spanish is not up to this level of content, but lots of interesting stuff in there, and it was well worth translating.
Oh, good. Well, I'll kick us off, and then we can come from your angle. So I will translate on the fly if I can. So what's been very interesting has been one of the first things, the difference between how the people who've been working from home have evaluated the company as opposed to the key workers. So what they're calling trabajadores esenciales. And it says that only 1/3 of those key workers said that the leadership of the organization had acted positively. So that's 1/3. And I like what they're suggesting in the Future for Work. They say that it might be because of the additional work that they will have taken on in the worst moments, and the conditions, and also just things like they might not have had enough protective equipment around. Yeah. So that is already really, again, another inequality in the world of work. Definitely. Is that the people who've been able to do remote have been different experience.
And they've been safer. And I'm sure this is not limited to Spain at all, but there seems to, this article for me was a good reminder that everybody's experience of this was so different. There were a lot of people sitting around unable to work because they were furloughed or they'd in Spain. There were other people who were working really hard at home in difficult circumstances, and there were other people who were doing their regular job and keeping us all fed and delivered to and medically cared for and so on in incredibly difficult circumstances. And it's easy to sort of, in our bubbles, to just think everybody's having the same experience of it as us. And these essential workers worked so hard. There were also a number of incidents in the Spanish press about people being kind of shunned within their communities. And it was awful. People, doctors having notes stuck on their car saying, you shouldn't be coming back to this apartment block. You should stay in the hospital because you're contaminated, and really horrible, which I'm sure were isolated incidents. But if I can sort of see if this 1 in 3 people didn't feel that their performance was being valued. And that article that I'm remembering was from a consultant rather than a cleaner or a supermarket worker who might have even more reasons to feel less valued on the whole, given what the minimum wage is in Spain. So really difficult situation. It was easy to think, living in Spain through the lockdown, it felt like everything was very well organised. Certainly things happened very quickly and essential services kept going very well. But it's hard to tell what someone's really thinking and feeling behind a mask when they're packing your shopping.
Yeah. So another reminder of that, and the difference between how the different types of work experience not just something like a pandemic, but also how they experience the future of work. Because again, this difference between the knowledge workers and the fact that technology is making some people's jobs easier, but not everyone's. I think we need to continue thinking about that. It reminds me also of I was having a conversation with a company. They're actually a collection of businesses, and they were saying, we want to introduce remote work, but we have a very equal, I don't know, the expression was there's coffee for everyone, as in they want the experience of being an employee in the company to be equal for everyone. But of course, they have some factory workers, they have some people who cannot do the work from wherever. So they were thinking about if we introduce remote work, then we're going to start creating a different experience. I said, well, don't talk about remote work, talk about flexible work and introduce flexibility wherever you can. Make that your aim, flexibility, not work teletrabajo.
Yes.
So
yes,
this is a good
indeed.
reminder.
And I think the other thing this article drew attention to was that middle management layer, which it ties into our earlier conversation about monitoring and people who feel it's their responsibility to be accountable for the work of others when they're suddenly put in a situation where everything's changed and they've got to manage up as well as down. I think that's probably exceptionally difficult.
Yeah, there's the article is indeed saying that with the introduction of technology, that the organizations have become flatter. That's why we advocate for a work of this kind and online collaboration, because you don't need gatekeepers of information and you don't need as much. You can find your own way around the organization. But of course, if your identity as a manager is that connected, then let me see if I can find yeah, it says that the those who thought that the role was limited to like that kind of belt, that not a belt, conveyance belt, that's one, of moving instructions and information between different levels of the hierarchy. That role, you don't need that role when you're communicating through technology anymore.
No, visible teamwork could obviously make a lot of that functionality almost disappear. It just becomes manifest in the work itself. So it's not surprising a lot of people feel threatened by that. And I think without wanting to resort to stereotypes, it's fair to say that a lot of Spanish businesses are very hierarchical and there are very kind of more constrained career paths and expectations. So that might be a more substantial part of how somebody sees themselves as well as their career.
There's a big thing around identity and manager identity. And when we go into new ways of working, which are less hierarchical, which suggest more self-organization, we've got to really help managers to redefine their role and find a new identity sometimes.
Yes.
And it's not just, I find it so sometimes it's not even, sometimes it's the opposite of hierarchical. It's so instead of controlling through control, it's controlling through caring. And so if you're a manager that really sees themselves as a people person, always has their door open, always buying coffee to people, show your care, etc., or even not even your door open, you sit there in the middle of the team so that they see that you're one of them. And then suddenly you don't have that physical space to show how much you care. Again, it's this is very complicated.
Yeah, definitely. And it is going to be about helping people through that and to redefine themselves. And it's a really interesting challenge on so many levels.
Yeah, and to take it then back, or sorry, not take it back, to move it forward into better ways of working where we can integrate what we've learned together with what we would like to have. It really needs to go this deep. It's really, I mean, this is where the conversation gets interesting, of course.
Yeah.
One other bit that I thought was worth pulling out, because again, I think it's very relevant to any kind of company in any environment, especially doing transition, is that the young people, of course, and of course during the pandemic, of course, the young people had a very, very different experience, especially if they were working from home. And they said in the study that they viewed the experience more negatively. And this is again going back to the big question of the research, which was about how they viewed the leadership of the organization having been communicating. They think it was more negative. One is because of all the uncertainty that anyway this segment of the population would be having anyway also. Then of course, and we always, when we say remote work is not working from home, and when they say that young people would love it, well, actually lots of young people don't have the homes to be able to work from them. And then finally is that when we are young, the workplace provides a lot of that social contact, connection, and that's where we feel comfortable. Going
Definitely.
back to identity.
Spain is a long hours culture. You know, people work late into the evening, and as such, it's really normal for your social life to revolve around your colleagues and the people that you interact with. If suddenly that's taken away from you, and you're stuck in a small apartment shared with 4 other people or something. I mean, I can well imagine it's been a really difficult time for a lot of young people. And at the moment, a lot of the talk is now about the economic uncertainties, and Spain's still reeling from the impact 10 years ago of the last financial crisis. And there's a lot of conversation around the impacts that's had on a generation's careers and prospects and on their earning potential for the rest of their lives, people who graduated 10 years ago. So there's a lot of people feeling really dismayed and uncertain over what this means for people who are entering the workplace now. So a great deal of uncertainty for that generation going forward that's bound to have coloured how they felt about how things were done in recent months.
Yeah. So again, another country, but very similar things and very different things. And of course, like you were mentioning, how the makeup of the country, the culture of the country affects so much any kind of new work ways of working, etc., and how much different things are adopted or taken up. Is there anything else from the article that you highlighted, Maya?
Towards the end of it, there was going back to the bit about managers. I've got this up in English thanks to Google Translate. Thank you, Google Chrome. I know there's a phrase that's come out, and I don't know what the original said, but could it be that managers suffer from the naked emperor syndrome?
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what it says.
Yes, which I thought was a beautiful reflection of how uncertain sometimes people feel about their own work, and a reminder that imposter syndrome happens at every level. And we really need to make sure that when people are working remotely, that somehow we create the structures around them to make them feel secure and confident that they're doing the right things, that's being measured in the right way, and that their role within the team is important.
Yeah, and it's making me think of, if my role is to make sure that people are working. If I can't see it, how is that going to happen? Well, that's fine, but maybe you're not just watching that they're working. Maybe you're watching that they're comfortable. Maybe you're watching that they're talking to each other, and really help people just break down what it is they think they're doing, because I'm sure we can get down to the core of something that we can translate into the online space.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, listeners, we would love to hear if you are in countries that we don't have any idea of what's going on there, which are, I don't know, how many countries are there in the world?
Quite a few.
Yeah, and then maybe subtract 3 or 4, and then that's all the countries. We haven't got a clue about how this is being experienced. Please let us know, because we are bringing our own, what we are seeing, what we are reading, and actually it's quite limited. So virtual... Yep.
No, I was just going to say, it actually really helps you to see your own culture and expectations and norms differently when you look at the way things are done somewhere else. So it's incredibly valuable, even if it's somewhere we're not likely to do any client work or have any podcast listeners. It's just absolutely fascinating.
Oh, client work, that's a whole market that's open. Guys, if you're in Spain, get in touch. We can help you. So virtualnotdistant.com for your, check out our services. But going back to, if you are somewhere in the world that you think, actually, I'd love others to hear how we're experiencing it, or actually it's being very similar to what you're talking about, or we're having a completely different experience, this is going in a direction that I would have never imagined, please get in touch. So as I said, virtualnotdistant.com, or you can email me directly, Pilar, Pilar, at virtualnotdistant.com. Right, let's go back to the Anglo-Saxon world with an article that I saw Teresa Douglas share on LinkedIn. Teresa has been in on our show on numerous episodes, and she knits. So we have sometimes to be careful when we name her so that she doesn't stab herself with a needle. So I think she shared this on LinkedIn, Teresa Douglas. And the article, she didn't write it, but she shared it. The article is about the different ways that companies have redesigned their performance reviews, or what they're doing around the performance reviews in the time of the pandemic. And this spoke volumes. What were your main thoughts around this, Maya?
I thought it was a really interesting roundup, though it's obviously quite a short and selective article. It was a good reminder for me how driven by performance reviews some organisations clearly are. And I think based on everything we've been discussing for the last 20 minutes, it's important to remember how different places are around the world and even within the same organisation. So any attempt to give people performance reviews as a level playing field this year is going to be fraught with lots of potential pitfalls. So it's just interesting to see the way different corporations are approaching that and trying to process that and deal with it. I think it'd be better just not to review anybody this year.
Yes.
You can have this one. It's a little bit like the things that I'm going through with my daughters in their schooling at the moment, trying to decide, well, does everybody just get an average grade? Or do we try and evaluate based on what people were doing before or how people have responded in very recent but very atypical times? So I wouldn't want to be having to plan a performance review program at this time.
Yeah, you're right. It's very similar to what might be happening in schools. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. So, listeners, sorry, because I went straight into the article, but it's called 4 Different Approaches Companies Are Taking to Performance Reviews This Year. And it's in the LinkedIn Talent blog from June 24th, 2020. I had a couple of things, one that I really liked and one that I went, oh. So let's do the one I really liked was this company I haven't heard of, Sprinkler, which is an software as a service customer experience management platform, is currently conducting one-to-ones with employees every 6 weeks. So, I mean, we always advocate for something like this rather than the annual review. For some people, it might be too much. Employees are asked to rate their happiness level on a scale of 1 to 10 and to discuss what it would take to make them a 10. They're also asked to rate their own performance towards their goals and development plan. I love this. This really reminds me of things like Automatics 321, where you start with, when it's all so employee focused. And I love that. You first start with how happy you're feeling and how can I be happy? I love it.
Yeah, I really like this approach. A very difficult thing to implement as a response to change, because obviously this is quite intensive for the HR team or for the management team to put in place. I'm sure it's something that really pays off in terms of productivity and happiness within the team. And all power to them if they've managed to do this in response to the current situation and, just increasing that contact and that conversation. I'm sure it's got to be the best way to help people through change, whatever that change is. And there's never been a greater test of it than just now.
Yeah, amazing. And then on the other hand, I think it was in the last episode we did together last month, Maya, that we looked at how Facebook was saying that they were looking at, reducing the salaries of people who are working from home, depending on where they were working from. So at the end of this article, says CEO Mark Zuckerberg has also stated that employees who have positive performance ratings and who are at a certain level with the company may be allowed to remain remote permanently if they choose. Remote as a perk again.
Yes,
no.
It's a reward. It's we trust you, but we don't trust you over there. We want to keep you where we can see you.
It's
shut up.
I thought it was such a shame. I thought it's such a shame. If this is all correct, I imagine it all is. That we go back to you can work from wherever, but only if your job is important enough and you're fantastic. Well, have you thought about how some people might get better at their work if they work from wherever they work best?
And yet this is in contrast with the subheader here, which about the performance reviews. So Facebook is giving every employee a positive review rating and a bonus. So that feels a little bit like, it's a little bit like back to the school's evaluation now of just saying we're going to have non-competitive sports day and give everyone a medal. So you'll never know actually how you're doing.
It's very strange.
It makes, if we say we're going to give everyone a positive review, then you might as well just postpone it. It doesn't really give you any steer on what you can improve or even what you're doing well. So they're going to give every employee the same exceeds expectations review rating for the first half of 2020. What's the point of that?
I suppose it's a gesture. I suppose it's a gesture saying we think you've really been amazing and you've gone through this really, really well. So here, but as you say, sometimes we rate ourselves in comparison with others, and so maybe it means less if everyone gets it.
Yeah, and I'm sure some have exceeded expectations by a big stretch more than others. There will be some people who've got through this. There will be some people who've done the bare minimum. There will be others who've really excelled themselves, and there ought to be some way to recognise that instead of giving everyone an average and a pat on the head.
I'm glad I don't have to be doing this like this, I have to say. Oh, it's so complicated. Good. So I skipped over this other one, which actually I think probably went better with the Spain segment, Maya, which is an article from The Observer, which says that only 13% of UK working parents want to go back to the old normal. And Tim Burgess, I had already found this article before you shared it in Virtual Team Talk, but that just shows how this has been popular. And this is from 28th of June, 2020. As a parent, I will let you comment on this first, Maya.
Well, I think, yes, this is one of those sort of growing body of articles that we used to find in the business press, which is now seeping into the sort of everyday media, people talking about home working and what they want. And for a lot of parents, this has been a very positive time. In fact, you'll see an awful lot of parents at the moment saying, "Oh God, I can't wait. The homeschooling, it's been a nightmare. It's been a disaster." But actually, what it's done for their relationship within their families, it's been some positive within that, and it's shown people a glimpse of what it might be like not to go off to work every day. And I'm sure a lot of people, and I know anecdotally from talking to friends, that are definitely going to look at trying to negotiate some more flexibility going forward. They don't want to go back to how it has been for the last few months, but they don't want to go back to exactly what it was like just before that either.
I think that's great. I think it's really good that people have, because sometimes you don't even, and also probably some people had been thinking about it, but of course you're not going to say, "Oh, let me have a try just to see."
And now we can talk about it. We've seen our managers struggle with their kids running in the middle of a Zoom meeting and things like that. So, we've opened that conversation up now. So I think that's the genie out of the bottle for that.
Yeah, and it's a nice contrast to having the surveillance thing in your computer that we were talking about at the beginning, because it says that more than half of the respondents, 53%, believe that flexibility would increase their productivity. Yeah. And well over half, this is really interesting, 58%, agree it would increase their loyalty. Something to say also when I think Lisette Sutherland shared the Facebook article at some point in Virtual Team Talk about how they were saying basically people might have to take a pay cut if they want to work from home, depending on location in Facebook. And Lisette reminded me that some time ago there was another piece of research that said people would take a pay cut if it meant they could work from home. Yeah. So yeah, it's really interesting. And this reminds us that the thing about the loyalties come up before in earlier research also. So it's really nothing to be underestimated, because when you can work from everywhere also, and if people are offering work from everywhere, if you're a talented, well-connected individual can go off and work from anywhere.
You can work for anyone in the world. And you might as well if you don't feel loyal or well respected for the work you're doing where you are. And the idea of flexibility or home-based working as a perk, as something that makes people loyal, that might actually dilute as it becomes the norm. If it does become the norm, it becomes more normal. Up until very recently, people who had that on offer to them were fairly rare and privileged. Now more people have had a taste of it. I think it's interesting that people are saying that they agree that it would increase their loyalty, but that's based on current circumstances. And if in a year's time there's a much larger proportion of knowledge work jobs that are being offered on a remote basis and recruited on a remote basis, then that might shift simply because it doesn't need to. People will have to find other reasons to be loyal and other ways to make their place of work a great place to work, because people will be able to go and work from anywhere for anyone.
That's a great point. Again, I hadn't thought of that. And it reminds me of an episode from the, what's it called? It's Automatics Distributed is the name of the podcast. And I think it was the last episode of 2019 where Matt Willenberg said, we get sometimes people who write to us saying they want to work with us because we're a remote company. That's not the reason why you want to work at Automatic. You want to work because of whatever culture, because of the job, because of the products, whatever. And I think you're right that maybe with you and I, the first conversation we had, I don't know if it was 6 or 7 years ago, Maya, we said, at some point we'll stop talking about virtual teams and it would just be Teams. So maybe at some point, this whole thing about being able to work from everywhere, maybe
It'll
it's
just be work.
yeah, and it won't be a perk anymore, or yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
Facebook,
Well,
you have to do better than that.
So let's get to the last couple of articles, which are much lighter, listeners. Don't worry, and they are about. I think again in the context of the world of work, there's some stuff that Slack's been doing. I'll pick mine because it's shorter, and then we can go onto the ones that you were thinking of, Maya. And I just saw, and I haven't tried it yet, that Slack has a new emoji pack to help, as they say, with your remote work balance. And it's whatever we're talking when we talk about deliberate communication, your availability, your context, your mood. They've created emojis for that. So. Thank you, Slack.
I think they've been listening to our podcast, do you think? Because we've talked so much about using our remote work tools to convey things about our context and our mood and our situation and everything. So, it's really good to know someone at Slack is either thinking along the same lines or just listening hard and creating all sorts of different ones. There's an emoji about your cat's love for your keyboard.
Oh, okay.
Which might be useful if you've just typed some complete rubbish. But things like my children need me now, or where you've gone for lunch and so on. I think it's great that if people can communicate this in an emoji or a quick reaction when they can't type a response, a react-G, as we were discussing last month, is another word for that. Excellent. It's just a nice sense that Slack is listening and these tools are coming out there, and it feels like it's bringing the conversation round full circle.
Yeah. And so how about this thing that, and by the way, this article is in the Slack HQ blog, but you've got a collection of articles from angel.co, but the main one, Maya, was about how to be honest, sorry about I haven't quite figured out if Slack Connect is something completely different or just a new feature. And it says it lets up to... Okay, so
I haven't seen it in use before, but it sounds like what Slack is, because for a while now we've had the ability to connect across two different organizations with a joint Slack channel, and it sounds like this is a sort of explosion of that. Slack Connect lets up to 20 organizations chat in one channel, so you can bring in within your own Slack community a whole load of different organizations, different groups. It looks like this is only in the paid tier for now, but it might be available in the free Slack in the future. That's why I haven't seen it, because all my plans are free. But it means you can direct message people who are outside of your team, basically. So it's extending Slack functionality, even dare we say it, into the realms that might have been left to email before, of actually being able to contact someone in another company that you're doing some work with.
I am so curious to see the issues this brings up, because I was thinking how even in like communities, or even when we bring someone into our Slack, I mean, we've got the version where we can bring guests in who only have access to one channel, or sometimes with Shield Geo we shared one channel. So this was the what you were referring to, one mini version. But if you think of how each Slack is operated differently. Every team, every organization has a different set of expectations. And as much as we want to say we're going to have a team agreement every time we enter a new space, let's face it, we just go, you're going to come on Slack. It used to be before, just come in. Can you imagine 20 organizations in a project? I think this is going to be very interesting. So, listeners, it is today the 30th of June, 2020. So at some point, this will probably be taken up by plenty of organizations. I would love to hear your experiences. So even if we're now a year into the future, do let us know. So virtualnotdistant.com. Let us know how you get on and some of the challenges, and if you've made it work, how you are making it work. Anything else, Maya, around this?
No, it's just really interesting having read this directly after the one from Slack about emojis and things about your cat and going to the school bus, and then suddenly the next thing on the Slack blog says, introducing Slack Connect, the future of business communication. So it seems from one extreme to the other of kind of cute teams who know about each other's pets to now we're obviously going to take over the world and change the way that people do business across different different companies and teams. So yeah, good for Slack. It's been interesting, actually. We haven't heard as much from Slack during the lockdown. Everybody's gone for video. Everybody's talking about Zoom and Teams, and that's asynchronous communication, despite the fact that we keep talking about how important flexible communication is, has taken much more of a backseat as people try to replicate that immediacy of talking to people in real time. But maybe it's time now for Slack to sort of step into that space a little bit. Now people are talking about long-term strategies for remote collaboration, and we've all got over the idea of seeing each other on video all the time. Maybe now it's time for Slack to pick up Slack, and now they're offering these ways for organizations to work together more flexibly. So yes, I definitely agree. It will be a really important one to keep an eye on and possibly come back to and take another look at further down the line.
And listeners, especially if you are new to online collaboration and you have either Microsoft Teams or Slack or anything similar, you do not need to use it real time. It can be an asynchronous space. You decide how you're going to use it. So it can be an amazing space if you agree response times that allow you to work. If you turn off your notifications, if you don't want to be notified, you make it yours. So I think that's really important. If you're new to it.
So important to remind people of,
don't ditch
if you've got 20 organizations collaborating in one channel, you do not want that to be real time or your head will explode.
Yeah, don't ditch it just because it's usually used in real time. Don't ditch it for something else. It can be a lot better and healthier than email, just because you will go to your communication space rather than messages coming to you if you control your notifications. So anyway, that's the rant. I think it's very, I constantly reminding this. Okay, well, listeners, virtualnotdistant.com for your thoughts. And I've got a couple of things to share about some of people connected to our company. You can connect with other listeners by sharing your thoughts via our contact form at virtualnotdistant.com. When I say people connected to our company, I suppose I mean some listeners and some people who found us through LinkedIn. But I want to say first, thank you, shout out to Chris Coladonato, because I think she shared the episode, or she commented on my post on LinkedIn about the episode on task interdependence and visible teamwork. And it was just one of those messages that said, yeah, need to listen to this again, because we don't really think about this when we are looking at communicating in our team. So thank you, Chris. It's really nice that, it's just nice to hear someone's listening. We know.
Yes, I listened to that one because I wasn't involved in that episode at all. And I definitely recommend it. If anybody only dips in and out of our podcast and hasn't listened to that one about task interdependence, if you're trying to think how to plan how you do things with other people, you really need to listen to that episode first and think about how your work with other people happens anyway. Then you can work out how to plan it remotely.
Yeah, thank you. And that is episode 239. That's it. And thanks to Teresa Sigilito-Holema for introducing me to task interdependence, which has such a not very sexy title. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It helps us. I also wanted to thank Andy Brogan, because actually he also shared that episode. And I also, this is just a more personal plug, the International Association of Facilitators England and Wales chapter at the moment is thinking of doing the conference online in October. It was going to be an annual in-person meetup, but it's been postponed as an in-person. But I think of doing something online. So check that out. It's end of October. I just wanted to give a shout out. And then I had a couple of people reaching out from LinkedIn. One of them was Diego von Schosten, who has some thoughts, some research on how users remained agile in their forced shift to remote work. So I said, well, you've got something, send it over. And it's just an overview of what's happened. Very, very brief. So we'll stick the link in the show notes. I don't know if you had a chance to have a quick look.
No, I'm looking at this one now. I haven't had a chance to look at this one. But it's always just really interesting to consider different perspectives and different opinions about this whole thing, and reminds us that everyone was starting from a different place.
Yeah, excellent. So it is a short read, and then this is this is very relevant. This other message to some of the stuff that we look at when we look at visible teamwork, which is it's linked to motivation. So Sharad Jivan, he said he's developing a short LinkedIn series on reigniting inner drive in our working lives. The series looks at how we may be deeply misunderstanding the role of work in our lives and how we can reignite a deeper sense of purpose, autonomy, and mastery, both as employees and employers. I think going back to intrinsic motivation is just really simple to do, and we forget. The best thing is that changes like this don't cost much at all and can be even more important in a remote working context. So Sharath is a leading expert on intrinsic motivation, and he's the author of a forthcoming book on the topic, and he's giving us his LinkedIn profile if you want to connect with him. So listeners, always happy to be this vessel between you. Let us know if there's something interesting that you think will interest our listeners, and we're very happy to share it, even if we can't always endorse it because we haven't really explored it in depth. So anything else, Maya, from your end?
I've been attending a couple of sessions this week with the Future of Work conference, which is all online. Again, it's still going on. In fact, it's only on day 2 now. And this sounds awful, but when something's all online, you do prioritize it less than when you've paid to go to an event. This has really reminded me of that. But it's also made me think that there's no way I could have taken a week off to go to a conference anyway, even if it was all really interesting. So I'm dipping in and out of the sessions. They're all being delivered remotely with live chat and speakers presenting some interesting topics. Today's theme is it's freelance day today, so lots of stuff about finding work and gigs and things like that. More stuff about products and teams and things later in the week. So maybe I'll have more to report back on that in next month's episode.
And anything interesting you've taken so far, or still digesting?
I'm still dipping in and out. Yesterday I went to a session on TikTok, which was quite... I just thought, I've got to check this out, because even though I am the mother of Generation Z teenagers, I still have not got a clue about what it is, this TikTok thing. So what I was interested because this was about TikTok for brands and businesses. So very, very interesting. I don't feel like I began to scratch the surface of it. I can see that there's huge opportunities there, especially with a book coming out hopefully soon. I can see that because there are so few brands on there, those that are, I don't know, Gary Vee's been talking about it a lot, that the door's wide open for brands who are early adopters. But I'm still not going to do videos of me dancing.
Oh, go on.
I don't know. I'm still struggling with it a little bit. Obviously, the speaker was marketing a course which you can pay for and go into in a lot more depth. So I'm not sure about that yet. I probably just need to read a little bit more about it. It was interesting because I came out of this webinar thinking, gosh, there's huge potential here. But still, what is it? I still don't get it. So that probably just showing my age, really.
Yeah. Well, TikTok, the social media thing with the coolest name ever. I think that's a great place to leave it for today, for this episode. We might even make it under the hour with the intro and outro and the music. So time to put on the aircon again. Maya, at your end, thank you very much for suffering for the ears of our listeners and Ross. Thank you very, very much, listeners. We know that there are loads of podcasts out there now on the future of work, remote work, etc. So we're delighted that you have stayed with us today. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.